Hi everyone, if you came to listen to the lecture in Yiddish you can stay on this channel. If you want to go to English, in 5 minutes we will open the English translation channel and you will see there's a button called interpretation down the screen, and then you can choose the channel English for listening in English, and you will hear like 80% English and 20% Yiddish in the background. We will see it in 5 minutes. In the meantime, I will put some music for Mendy. So welcome in Brichim Avuim.
Guck in deine Augen, mein Herz bum 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 geht a klopp. Meine Machschuves a Regen beugen, mein Bauch hat Schulen top. Ich hab a Fieber, Fieber in Frühmorgen, Fieber bis spät bei Nacht. Fieber wenn ich chulem, Fieber, wenn ich tracht. Wenn Janke vor der Sein ruchlen, hat in Herz a Dinner der Field. Aber in der Früh, wenn hat sich der Sein mit Lehen, hat schon einmal a Fieber gespürt, hat gehabt a Fieber, Fieber. Es kocht der Meuch, Fieber, Feier, Flamme. Fieber, es geht a Reuch, a Fieber in ihr Taten heran. Wer se lernt, a Blatt gemure, bekommt den Stern am Modner Kneitsch. Sucht zu treffen vor die Welt, as Wure. Wirst du schön wissen, gut von Fieber, der Teitscher, wo's heißt Fieber. Jeder einer hat a Fieber, das ist gar kein Yiddish nicht. Fieber ist ein alte Meise, gibt nur in chemischer Misch. Du willst sich der Quicken, geh hab a Kielwind laufen Dach. Aber Tomer, du der seist, was Sheva, kein Sogen Tillems wird nicht helfen, kein Sachs, hab doch a Fieber, Fieber. Du zergehst sich Fieber von Kopf bis Fies. Fieber, heus bitter, Fieber, es ist zuckersüß. Udo min Chave in Gan Eden haben sich mit Liebe und mit Äppel gespielt. Chave hat sich noch was der Warem, hat Gott Bauchhose gewesen, die Tier hat gehabt a Fieber, Fieber. Kave Juchel, Fieber, Feier, Flamme. Fieber, euer Achmunes, Fieber ist in die Welt heran.
Okay, Treule mich schön du. Deulen gibt noch ein bisschen rein. Es lommer und eben mit der Gitten in Shalom Aleichem. We will just start a minute with technical things about the translation. So I will turn on right now the channel from translation. Start. So now if you go down to the screen, you can see a button what it says interpretation. And if you click on it, you will find the channel what's called Yiddish. And if you press, you will be able to hear Easy Posen. Easy is our great translator, and he's the only one that I know in the Yiddish world that is translating live Yiddish to English. So thank you, Easy. In Shalom Aleichem, Mendy, Agitten.
Shalom Aleichem.
Met nog geben of 2 Minuten Reule, maar so uneven in treffende Übersetzung Kanal und so weiter. So we will give 2 minutes for the people, like if somebody wants to find. If you have any trouble to finding the channel, maybe you can just unmute yourself and ask for a minute before we start. Okay. So, Shalom Aleichem, in Brichem Abuim, zu Yiddish Eint mit Mendy Cahan. Yiddish Eint ist eine neue Serie Programmen, gemacht geworden durch die Yiddish Liga. Und ich weiß nicht, wie die Yiddish Liga ist. Die Yiddish Liga ist eine Organisation, die ist gegründet geworden, sie stützen und inspirieren die Yiddish Welt, stützen den Nutz von Yiddish in der tagtäglichen Leben, modernisieren die Yiddish, normieren die Yiddish, und machen Covid für Yiddish. Wir sind auch mit einer neuen Reihe Programmen, Yiddish Eint.
With a new series of programs called Yiddish Today, that looks at Yiddish and today's culture. And this program will be talking with Mendy Cahan, an artist, somebody who creates culture, or, you know, what does he not do? In the Yiddish world, there are all kinds of artists, big names, but it's rare to find someone who has all the colors, like a golden peacock, all the colors of Yiddish. He's a singer, he's a writer, he's an actor in theater, both on screen and on the stage, television programs, films. He also does comedy, and he set up an organization called YUNG YIDISH 30 years ago in Israel that does things for Yiddish. They have one of the biggest collections in the world about Yiddish books. So to talk about Mendy is a bit of a challenge to talk in 1 hour. I will try a bit, and if you have more questions, or if I've forgotten anything, you can always put in the chat, or you can ask towards the end. So let's start by hearing from Mendy. Hi. Hi. It's a big, I'm very happy to be here and to see how many people have come here on the Zoom. It makes me very happy. And it's a big honor. Thank you. And I hope that we'll be able to fill the hour and talk together. But let's start and see where it goes. Just when he started to speak, I've already been reminded about a couple of things that you've done, like radio programs. So maybe let's start by asking you, why do you do everything? How do you do everything? I do it because I enjoy it, because it's nice, because it's delicious, it's geschmack. Look, I like culture in all languages, in all the colors, and to see how people build themselves a world is a miracle. The human experiment, the humanistic experiment interests me, and Yiddish is a very beautiful to look at this phenomenon.
I'm glad you were here.
I'm glad you're here too.
So it's such a beautiful thing, and so humanistic and so divine. So where the two meet is really delicious. So let me tell you, I studied French literature, German, English, and it's but it looks like I wasn't good enough to be a master and have an influence in the other cultures. But in my own culture, my own Yiddish culture that I grew up in, I'm happy that I could do something and I can carry on doing things.
Sehr schön. Kannst du mir sagen, lass mal runter gleich von unten.
Let's start from the beginning. Probably many know, but tell us, where were you born? How did the whole the artist in Yiddish start? Well, it started, I was born in Antwerp, just like Moses and Einstein and Freud. I was born in Antwerp with parents who had just arrived there from Romania as immigrants, with nothing, with two children, and they came to Antwerp. And Antwerp was a Jewish city. There were all kinds of survivors of the Holocaust, and they all spoke Yiddish in the kindergarten and amongst ourselves and with the teachers and Chimish, Mishnah and Talmud. So it started there. My father was a learned Jew, a merchant.
He
started his life again a couple of times out of nothing. He was a comedian as well. He knew the art of comedy. But we all just spoke Yiddish. We didn't learn about the literature. We just loved Yiddish. You mentioned reading literature and so on, and studying Chumash and Gemara. So how did it change? Or maybe it didn't change. No, look, when you grow up in Antwerp, I was, how should I explain it? I grew up from the age of 10, 11, 12. I already understood that the Jewish community was a bit too closed. I wanted to know the big world, and the big world was literature. So that's how I started reading and learning about the big world, and dreamt that somewhere outside the small village, in the small circle of the Vilnius Shul and Aguda, and there where I live, there is a world where they're rational and where people love each other and where they live. So I would read a lot of literature. And I dreamt that one day I'll go out of this small world and become a citizen of the big world. But I knew that we shouldn't be hurting our parents, and you should do it in a relaxed way. So I found myself a way out after the age of 18. I learned with teachers, and I had good teachers. And afterwards, I went to a yeshiva for older boys in Mishkan Torah, and I studied there. And I hope that in 1 or 2 years it will end, and then I'll go into Hebrew University to be free. And that's how it was. I signed myself in, I enrolled, and I saw that the big world is not so big, and it's also not so perfect, and there's also divisions there, and they also talk rubbish and nonsense. So it took me around 10 years to find myself a balance between these things. Only after studying philosophy and Aristotle and all kinds of things did I come back to the Talmud, to Rambam, Maimonides, and these kinds of things. And that's when and postmodernism, well, I can go on for a long time. I don't know if it's saying anything, but I started with the postmodernism, and that brought me back to the Talmud. So I now understand that the whole cultural world is something that you need to understand a bit differently. And Yiddish was really the key to all these pieces, these, individual pieces, and the external pieces, my own world and the wider world and the fantasies and the dreams and utopia and progress. We want to get somewhere and bring the Messiah. This is all one thing. And Yiddish, yeah. So that's how it started. And Yiddish carries everything. Yiddish carries everything on a very interesting place, with humility, with openness, but also with brokenness, not with arrogance. It's an interesting phenomenon, Yiddish. Look, can I ask something? You have to speak with the... Let's leave questions towards the end. I want to ask, in which language, once you left the Talmud and so on, which language did you learn? I was born in Yiddish, speaking Yiddish. I also learned Flemish in nursery. We had Yiddish teachers and non-Jewish teachers, and the non-Jewish teachers speak Flemish. And later on, I would read in Flemish, and I would read geography and history in Flemish. In Yiddish, I learned the Mishnah and the Siddur and the Midrash and the Talmud and so on. But later on, when I'm in fourth year, when I'm 10, 11 years old, I also learned French. And by the time I'm 14, I start reading French and speaking with the girls who speak French, because the girls who spoke Yiddish wouldn't speak to me when I was 14. And German, I started reading because I told myself, if I know Yiddish and if I know Flemish, then I can probably understand German. So I start reading it and understand. English, you learn as a third language. So once I'm 15, 16, and I come to Israel in Yeshiva, I start developing that. So these are all the languages that work for me. For me, all the languages are like a cake, a layered cake, and everyone has its own piece. Not all of them go as deep. So, for example, with English, I learned a lot about knowledge, science. With French, I learned about literature, and so on. Every language has its own area. But today, Yiddish, Hebrew, and English are the most important for me. Good that we got to the languages for a second. All the languages that you mentioned, perhaps 7 seconds, and Hungarian. So this brings me to another question that I'm very curious about. I don't know if people know, but you played in a movie that won an Oscar. You acted. That's the Son of Saul. And there you worked as an interpreter. You were a screenwriter, and you also acted. And you wrote the soundtrack, the audio. Can you talk a little bit about that? How it was? The Son of Saul, that's a Holocaust movie that Laszlo managed. He came to Israel, and he was looking for material and for people and actors, and we met. We came to Young Yiddish. He told me that he wants to make a Holocaust movie, and I was a bit suspicious. I always have suspicion that when somebody wants to make about the Holocaust, because it's such an incomprehensible thing. But afterwards, when we got to know each other, and he showed me what he wants to do, and he asked me to translate for him, he wrote a script where everything is happening. It's 1.5 days, or 2 days, if I remember correctly, in Birkenau. And there he showed me the script that he wrote in French and in Hungarian and in English, and all of these languages helped me. I translated what he wrote into Yiddish. I mean, I translated into the language that would be spoken in the crematoriums. And also, what I did, the work that I did was to teach the actors to speak Yiddish, and I spoke with Czech actors and Polish actors and American actors, and you have to give them the Yiddish that it should come out normally, and it's not a simple thing. That was the work. The work as an actor I wasn't really an actor in the film. That wasn't what I was meant to be, but he did give me like 3 seconds in the beginning of the film. He gave me as an honor. It was a great work. It was one of the most difficult works I've ever done. And I came the closest to feel what the Holocaust was about. Maybe in Ponar as well, one of the two places. So how was it? I'm trying to imagine you're making the sound of the crematorium. How did you get there? How does one approach such a thing? Well, you approach such a thing because there's so few materials. So I went and I dug in, I read a lot from Blumenthal, from Kaplan, to speak about the language in the crematorium, in the ghetto, in the concentration camp. I listened a lot to witnesses who have the witnesses that spoke in Nuremberg in 46, witnesses that speak in Yiddish, and that helped me a lot to hear the language that they spoke. And besides that, more witnesses, and I tried what I could do. From the other hand, it's also a movie. It's not reality. It gives a feeling of reality. So, for example, afterwards we had to make the screaming that you can hear. It was very difficult work, and it really drained me. But I think it was a very important work. And it's won an Oscar. Yeah, it brought the topic of the Holocaust. People started speaking about it again. It won an Oscar. And it's a monument. It's a movie that was. Laszlo Nemes, he is the hero of this project. And I am very grateful that he gave me a part in it. Well, if we're talking about movie, let's cut to let's talk about the new television program where you are an actor and you're doing a similar work, you're working with other actors, with the Yiddish text, and that is about Belgium, about being a diamond merchant in Belgium, and it's very well. We shouldn't be talking. We shouldn't be telling everything because Netflix can put us on trial and sue us. But it's a film that's called Diamond, and it hasn't come out yet. And I act there with Yona Elian and Dudu Fischer, and they asked me to work with them on the Yiddish, which was very interesting because Yona Elian, who is a big Israeli actress, and she grew up listening to Polish Yiddish, and Dudu Fischer, he sings Yiddish and he's a cantor, and so they come with a lot of knowledge, but you need to make it in Antwerp Yiddish with an Antwerp accent. It was very interesting. It was very homely, heimish to come in Antwerp and to be in the stock market and in the shul and to see people on the set who I know. It was very good. It was, but I can't tell you more about it because it has to remain confidential until it comes out. So when is it? Will it be on Netflix? I think end of this year. If I'm not entirely sure. I hope by the end of this year. Well, we'll wait. We'll wait in health, and we'll watch a little bit less TV is also not a big problem. Anyway, it's interesting to see how Yiddish comes up in various places in the modern media, and I was hoping that that would be in Hollywood, these movies, and in series, and in Israel, and Yiddish finds its way to come up and don't leave those who think that Yiddish is dead. They don't let them to just be rest in peace. And there's no better example between you going between the old and the new. You know, talking about your disc that you produced a couple of years ago, and you know, I know you. I've known you for 8 years, and I've hung out with you for thousands of years. But I always find something new that I didn't know. One of the things that I see in your work is you give honor to old Yiddish, but also modernize Yiddish. So let's talk about the disc for a moment, for the album. Because think about the song we heard in the beginning of this event. So you translate that. It's a modern song, but you translate that into Yiddish. But yeah, with interpretation as well. Look, I don't have much to say. With Yiddish-Express, I tried to do an experiment. Yiddish-Express came out in the 90s. We started to play you know, it's been a while, and the Yiddish was still, we were listening a lot to Tom Balalaika and Yidel with the Fiedel again and again. So the Yiddish Express was like an invitation to show, you know, we can make something different. I knew that I'm limited with my artistic abilities, but I wanted to show you that you can do something with it. So that was the Fever and the music reworking that we did, the fresh perspective on new song, on old songs, and also a new perspective to take a bit from the Siddur, from the liturgy, and a bit from Peretz, and a bit from Leivik, and they put them together to show that there's a wide, we have a wide world to work with. We can swim around there, and the width and length and depth, and there's things to do there. I'll just add, if it wasn't clear, that the Yiddish Express is a band, a klezmer band, where you sing on it with them, and they the album is called Yiddish Fever. Yiddish Express is the band, and Yiddish Fever is the album. And we're waiting. We understand that you can't buy it now. But we wanted to buy it again. You know, I'm not a big merchant. I'm not a big businessman. But maybe something will happen, and somebody will publish it again. I'll tell you that I looked for it, and you can find it on Amazon secondhand. You can find Yiddish Fever. I found it. So if you look for it, maybe you can find it. Good.
Ja, was noch? Du machst so viel, es ist so viel, was zu reden.
Well, there's so much to talk about, but let's talk about the music. Let's go to talk about theater. So you played in lots of theater groups, in lots of stages around the world, and I want to talk about contemporary theater that happened during the pandemic, because we couldn't go on a stage, so the theater went over to Zoom. So how did it work? Look, an actor needs to learn all kinds of new things. So, you know, I think you're talking about the dibuk that we made with the Culture League. Shim Baker was the initiator of this. He worked with. It was great. Rickman. That was. It was to play in front of the screen, and you don't see the actors with whom you're playing. So you have to work with the imagination. But I think, you know, it came out very well. We had good compliment for it. It was, and now, by the way, tomorrow or in 2 days' time, the Alle Fenster will come out. We made a dibuk with the Culture Congress. And this Alle Fenster comes out on the 21st with a folk spinner. So it's interesting. But real theater on the stage has a different taste and a different power. And I'm very happy that recently we, together with you, Eli, and also Esther's Cabaret, when you were in Israel, and we could have pride that we did good things from here with Esti Nissim, pieces that others wrote. The truth is that the first script, the theater play that I played, was with Yehuda Morali from the Hebrew University, and then we played Eric in Hebrew. That was maybe in 1987. And since then, I played things, Gog or Magog, the story, Mendel Ermanovas and the Choiz of Lublin. And a lot of these productions, I could bring the Yiddish voice in Hebrew productions and in American productions. So that even if it's just a Yiddish song or a couple of Yiddish words, I brought a bit of Yiddish in all kinds of places. In the dibuk, where I played in Geshe, I also brought in a little bit Yiddish comedy that I wrote. That's the theater bit. But I was never part of the professional Yiddish theater in Israel because I'm too versatile, too eclectic, and there's Young Yiddish. That's such a nice stage that there's enough work as it is. I'll now explain a bit. You mentioned a lot of names. Maybe some know these names, maybe some don't. But Volksbühne is one organization that they are publishing soon a theater piece. And when I'll put up the video on YouTube, there'll also be there a link to find all these things you're talking about. You mentioned Volksbühne, the Culture Congress, and you mentioned Gesher as well. Gesher is a theater in Israel that you mentioned. It includes their dibuk, but maybe people don't know. But the same thing has been uploaded 250 times around the world. It's a play that was played in Moscow, in America, in all kinds of places. But Israel, I think 200 times. It's been 5 or 6 years, if not more. Maybe 7 years that's been playing. And that's in Hebrew. But it's a Yiddish story translated into Hebrew, and you play it and you added some Yiddish. Well, it's not really translated. It's not Amski. It's like a psychological dibuk. It's the reworking. I don't know if it's improvement, but it's the reworking. But I play the old Yiddish voice. They brought me to bring that in, there's a scene there of a shul, of a synagogue, and they wanted a bit of authenticity. So that was my work there. What it means, you know, how you sway and how you pray and how all kinds of things. And I also made a dance for one scene. And you're the rabbi. You're the rabbi that does the exorcism. No, I don't do the exorcism. I'm the rabbi. Once I marry them off, but it doesn't work because this dibuk goes in and I don't get any money for the marriage. But I don't do the exorcism. That's somebody who's bigger than me. And
yeah.
Dort bin ich schon
there,
Jampoler, was nimmt raus die Dibuk.
the one who does the exorcism and says go out, and it works more or less. So what's the difference between acting in Hebrew and acting in Yiddish? Can you put in the Yiddish culture in a different language in Hebrew? Because a lot of people say you can't translate Yiddish. Look, actors can do everything. Actors can be God and they can be Satan. Look, culture can be translated. You know, I saw in Japan, you know, Tevye the Milchike, the play. You know, I saw it in Japanese. So I don't think so much about the philosophical questions about translation. These are big problems. But a Jew, you know, however he swims like a Jew. So, you know, it works. It works. I can't give you a good answer for such a question. I think it is a problem. You know, first you got to do, and then you see how it comes out.
Man friert Esther's Kabarett. Das ist Kabarett, das geht in Israel. Es ist mehr eine
You
Serie.
mentioned the cabaret earlier. It's a series of cabaret in Israel now that is happening. Every cabaret is in several places, in Tel Aviv, in House Shalom Aleichem. And as we're mentioning Bet Shalom Aleichem, there's also the clips that play there and various things. So this is contemporary written in Yiddish. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about it. Look, first, so to make a Shakespeare today or a Leivik, the big plays that you can't do today because, well, so far it hasn't worked, but these are big things. Esther's Cabaret that they made, they've taken pieces, for example, a bit from Shakespeare, a bit from Shulam Ash, and they bring them together, and a bit from Bialik, and all these resonances play out on the stage and in a cabaret. So that's local, small theatre. It reminds me of the theatre of Schumacher, but that was a different world. And yet, with a modern, ironic Tel Aviv, a cynical perspective, and in the context of how we are with Yiddish and Hebrew and Israel and so on, it's a good work. In America, there are also Yiddish cabarets that others are doing. It's an opportunity to bring a lot of theatre in small windows. For example, I'll illustrate a small scene to help people understand what you're talking about. So you play the Messiah. Or Shulam Ash, who becomes the Messiah, together with Jesus on the stage. It's it's a surreal thing. Yeah, Shulam Ash.
Ja, auf dem Satz. Oh.
Oi, wei. Seid mir Michael. Jetzt geht?
Ja, da geht.
Okay. Es heißt, jetzt spiele ich ein bisschen so, wie ich gespielt habe.
Dein Video ist ausgelöscht.
Oi, wei. Ich sehe dich nicht. Ich meine nicht.
He's having technical problems.
Ja, warte eine Minute, warte eine Minute. The video is ausgelöscht?
Na, jetzt ist gut, jetzt ist gut.
Good for me to get a talking break as well.
Was kann man noch, ich kenne sich, okay, was darf man noch durchschmissen?
What else can we say, you know? I can't really talk, I don't like to talk about myself so much. But on the one hand, you know, I'm a bit shy. I think it's better to act on the stage rather than talking about playing on the stage. You know, I'd rather sing than talking about my singing. Or write. I'm sure that there's lots of writers today who want to get some advice. You know, they want to understand how you do it. Let's maybe listen to a bit of poetry that you wrote. Maybe you can read us something. Sometimes you want to write. Today I don't write so much. I'm more in oral teaching, but my friend who publishes Jerusalem Almanach, he asked me to write there a bit. So I'll read you something, if it won't be boring. And if it is boring, I haven't read in a long time. So I'm here between the computer and the writing.
The computer. No.
Well, okay, this is what I've written. This is how it's written. Playfulness and wonder. This is how this is difficult to translate. I'm sorry, I'm not going to translate that. I don't have a script for me. I can't do it.
Vergliedert, feier, flach und kalt, otemt sich heint auf an Eufen an Eiem, das verschimmelt Geruch von Banai und Vergehen. Es zieh euch ohne frisch Chalattel und galtel sich ein mit der Schüssel und Mäus. Und wie ein blinder Singer bei eure Portalen sing ich euch mein weichen Trott. Efter das ist noch ein Stückele, noch so, du zwischen flüssige Kristallen, bedeckt mit der Leilach von erstklassigen Plastik, will ich einschläfern die Wolkenwärter, was wie Schäumsprach auf Chwalies. Schwimmen noch auf und tiefe Banem. So, nein, es macht schwarze Leinen. Ich sehe nicht, dass geht jetzt.
Difficult for me to read. I'm not seeing well. But it's an interesting piece. You know, how a word gets transformed. You know, it's interesting how it just goes from words and it comes over the internet, comes to you, and we're far from each other, but we're close to each other. You know, so even though I don't see you, we are close. Very nice. Well, if we're talking about poetry, we have to come back and ask you the big question. What's the difference between poetry and Badkhones? That's the kind of rhyming comedy. And I mentioned that you have a course about Badkhones. Your father was a Badkhon, and you write poetry. Look, Badkhones is a nice thing. It's an old Jewish tradition, a Yiddish tradition. And, you know, it goes through all of Ashkenaz, and it took various forms. And, you know, I was lucky to learn a bit the history of Badkhones. The Badkhon is perspective of what's happening in the society with a bit of a, you know, comedy, with a bit of cynicism, and it incorporates many voices over history. There's still big Badkhonim today in the Orthodox Jewish world. And the Badkhones in history also becomes the Spieler. He is the first actor. He is maybe the first one who will write critique on the society and on the leaders. So the Badkhones is an interesting, the difference between poetry and Badkhones. Poetry is more sophisticated, more worked out, more based on the power of a written language, whereas Badkhones, you have to say it with heart. It's the oral tradition, it's spoken, it's for a moment. It's good for a moment, and then it dissipates. So you have to be there at that place, that time. That's what it is. It's more improvised, and you sing it, and you're not trying to be too sophisticated. You want to be more from the heart, more homely. You want to give us a bit of Badkhones?
Ja, in seit Michael, wir können nicht übersetzen, Poesie in Badkhones, das ist ein bisschen...
And excuse us, it's a bit difficult to interpret, for those who are listening to the English channel, it's a bit difficult to interpret live poetry. But now listen to a bit of Badkhones from Mendy.
Wollt nicht gewinnt kein Denker, wer wollt uns gesiedeln? Euer wollt nicht gewinnt keine Lehre, wollt doch Hulile der Hebelt in Neukois shel Beis Rabon sich verschwart bei die Kinder. Wir wollten Hulile nicht gewinnt kein Herre, wohl doch verstimmt gewohnt der Singer. Aber seinen die Klezmer. Und seinen die Denker, und seinen die Lehrer, und Baruch Hashem seinen die Herren. Und wir sitzen du alle in der Saal, vers les étoiles, das heißt, als Mamisch mir greichen, kümmert sie die Sterne. Und dort hat mir gesehen, wie die Vereinigten Nations, alle Völker, sei willen und sei beten, Jiddisch zu hören. Ist der Pfarrer, wo ich sei, wie wo ich sei, teure Freund, es ist mit Vergnügen, was mir will in der Liedl, du Hulosen klingen. Und sie mit größt Kuvet in Vergnügen, sich hilfreich singen.
So, you mentioned that that's in UNESCO. Well, that was in 2008 or 2012, I don't remember. And that was in the UNESCO a discussion about Yiddish and what the world should do to keep Yiddish alive. And That was the concert. By the way, the piece where you stop the recording, afterwards, I carry on Badkhones in French because I was in Paris, and in Yiddish. So it's some kind of, that's kind of my piece of work.
Et si vous vous dites maintenant en français, oi vai gewaltig geschrieben, mais comment je vais comprendre? Alors je vais vous dire d'abord, mes chers amis, vous pouvez aller à la maison de la culture yiddish, et vous pouvez l'apprendre. Et une autre façon, que j'ai une solution, vous pouvez toujours vers votre voisin, votre voisine, à gauche ou à droite, vous pouvez vous tourner et lui demander, et je suis sûr qu'il le vaut bien mieux que moi, chaque mot vous expliquer. En ob doch ze bleibt a cheberachal, et sa frage, et sa cache. Alors criez, et je vais faire de mon mieux pour qu'on puisse tous comprendre ensemble la voisai et le
It's mixing the languages. This exists with the Hasidim as well. Do you think this is part of Yiddish or more part of Badkhones? No, I think that's what it means to be a Jew. You have to be able to manage in many languages. You have to say a big event, and you have to say things in French. You know, what's important is to live. The language is to communicate, how people can understand each other. People understand each other good. It doesn't have to be, you know, pure, only speak a pure Yiddish and a pure German. Communication is not a pure thing. It's a messy, you know, you're sweaty and you're dusty, all kinds of things. All of this is part of the language. It's okay. However it goes, that's how it goes. I'm not a purist. Well, if we're talking about other languages, you also on the radio, you said the news. I was in Kol Israel in Jerusalem. I read the news and I had a little bit of a program. I like radio. You know, it's based on the power of sound, of the voice, without the visual. That's very powerful. It's more powerful than seeing. To listen is more powerful. I like the power of the voice. The voice is the Jewish voice, and the hands are Esau's.
No, also ich meine mal, man gerät kiemat auf alles. Ich probiere reden auf Sachen, was ich meine, dass der Eulen wird fragen, indem es Spuren ab Fragen ist von der Eulen.
I want
to add one more thing. And this was very interesting for me when I was in Vilnius. I published only one book in my life, which is Megillas Matthias, the book of Matthias. And this was published quietly. That's how I wanted it to be published, almost like a handwriting that gets lost. And it's in English, but in English as a language, as if it's translated as if the Yiddish went lost and it's translated from the manuscript in English.
We
know that the scroll of Esther's, there's a discussion whether it's a scroll or a letter. So that's why when you read it in shul, you bend it like a letter. So this book as well is also one of those things. It's between a scroll and a book and a letter. But we'll keep this a little bit mysterious. One thing, I'm sure people will ask about it. Purim Spiel, we spoke about it a lot, but I just want to add a bit. The play that you do every year on Purim in Tel Aviv, You also did the Purim Spiel online. Tell us something about that. So the Purim play is a great thing. It's a historical thing. We find sources about it from the 1500s. In the 1600s, we have examples. There's a great Purim Spiel from the 1600s and the 1700s, and on stages, and then it becomes the kind of folk thing. It's a very interesting thing, this Purim day. It's also a window where the people's voice can come out with a parody, with a satire of the establishment daily, with its own irony, how they see the Jewish history. It has a big power. And, I worked on it as a monologue. It used to take us 2-3 hours, and we used to read the whole Megillah with a parody, with a midrash. And it became a tradition in Young Yiddish to do that. And a couple of years ago, we did a great Purim play in Weimar. They took sources from Manga and Goethe and put it together a Purim play. So it's a big thing in Jewish history and Yiddish history. We'll now take questions. Before we go over to questions, I see that people are asking who I am. And so Eli Benedict is a great, has a lot of knowledge and an activist, very active. He now lives in Canada, which is a shame. He used to be in Israel and he helped us a lot to build Young Yiddish and put this all together. But now he's a researcher in Yiddish in academia. And also outside of academia, he works as appropriate. So maybe Eli should introduce himself. Well, yeah, thank you of what you said. Well, I do a lot of things, but the lecture today is not about myself, but I organize the programs at the Yiddish League, and I'm responsible for the new series of Yiddish Today and other activities that will be happening as well. And in general, the Yiddish League is trying to do more activities, and do follow us. I'll put in the chat later all the places where you can follow us. We'll also be coming up with a new website for the Yiddish League. And if you go on YouTube or Facebook, you can see all the programs, all the old programs that we have done. So every 2 weeks, there'll be another video. Once it will be, every other time will be a direct event, a live one, and every other time, once a month, it will just be a video recording that we did that isn't a live event. So let's go over to the questions. And by the way, whoever's listening to the English channel, I won't be translating the questions and answers, but you can, if you are English speaker, you can ask your questions in the chat, and maybe Ali will read it through in Yiddish. So this is where my job finishes. Thank you very much.
Ich danke noch die Yiddish League für die Möglichkeit, sich durchzuspießen, ein bisschen mit euch.
Geht. So über so Schkoich auf Kimen, in Schkoich auf Reden, und auf seine Stunde noch Scheiles, weil wir schließen. Nefschal wir schließen, ich pushe gleich eine von deinen Lieder. In der Eule wird sich ein bisschen suchen Schkoich in Avekein.
Fein.
Du ist es. Weiter.
מסויד חכמים ונבוינים מסויד חכמים ונבוינים ומלמד אז מבינים הבטחו פי ושיעור היו מלמד אז מבינים ומלמד אז מבינים הבטחו פי ושיעור וסחדוני בשירו ושחנוני.
Und trockt mich zum Feier und trockt mich zum Scheiter. Ich brenn und ich brenn, aber wer nicht verbrennt. Ich heb sich heu wieder und spanne weg weiter. Jetzt spann ich sich ein im Gespann von a Pferd und über mir peitscht der zornte Reiter wie ein Ackerer Scharfer. Ich grob durch die Erde, ich heb sich heu wieder und spanne weg weiter, weiter. Ich spanne weg weiter, weiter, weiter und weiter, weiter. Ich seh meine Lieder, wie Kerner man sieht. Sie sprotzen, sie wachsen wie Sangen und Kreiter. Nur ich allein bleib wie ein Dorn verdreht. Ich heb sich heu wieder und spanne weg weiter. Ich wohne in der Wiese, ich reiß auf die Zelle. Es spannt über mir zu sein Glück der Befreiter. Nur mir lässt er liegen im Blut bei der Schwelle. Ich heb sich heu wieder und spanne weg weiter, weiter. Ich spann weg weiter, weiter, ich spann weiter. Mensch, die Welt ist a Börse beschaffen. Machen a Weg mit Fäusten und Nägel zum Schenkfass und fressen und säufen. Wenn andere gucken von Weitem mit gläsernen Augen und schlingen das Speierz und skrämt sie der Muggen. Meinisch, die Welt ist a Hefker. Die Welt ist kein Kretschme, kein Schenk, was kein Hefker. Gewussten wird alles, gewogen wird alles. Die Welt ist kein Hefker, kein Schenk, was kein Börse. Gemosten wird alles und gewogen wird alles. Kein Träer und kein blutiger Tropfen vergehen. Und umsist wird kein Funk von kein Augenlicht verloschen. Und umsist wird kein Funk von kein Augenlicht verloschen. Gemosten wird alles, gewogen wird alles. Wird Teichen, von Teichen wird Jammen, von Jammen am Abel, von Funken a Donner. Meinisch lässt din, will es dein. Meinisch lässt din, will es dein.
Ja, Geht, so, großen Dank für den Kiemen, Mendy. Und,
ich warte, dass ihr sollt alle kommen zu Jung Jiddisch, Tel Aviv, und wir sollen sich sehen im Freitag.
Geht, sei gesinnt, Mendy.
Seid gesinnt in Stark.